We're going to start on time today. All right. So the last class we were talking about how HTTP methods are typically used in REST APIs. It's all focused on using a resource. REST is representational state transfer. So there's got to be some representational state that's being transferred back and forth. As a result, we need to have some way of identifying and showing what that state is. And so how do we do that? So we have to talk about what we mean by a state, or what we're going to use as a representational state. But just as a reminder, Post is going to be used to create a member resource. So we're going to send a new resource via Post. Via get is to go get things. When we have a group of items, we refer to as a group of items, we can retrieve them all. We can create a group of member resources. We can replace the representation using put. Put is used to change what is already there. Patch is a update. Patch is a little bit similar to put, but the difference is instead of wiping out what is there, we're just going to update what is there. We're probably never going to use patch directly because we don't need to. Works for us that we don't need to, but you could. And delete deletes all the representation. The same thing is played out in the individual resource. So with an individual resource, you have same URI, but you're also going to have a way of identifying the specific item you're referring to. Post is going to create a member resource. It's going to retrieve a representation of the specified resource. Put's going to replace it, patch is going to update it, and delete's going to delete it. So what the hell do we mean by a representational state? So we're going to be talking about a media type. And the media type can be anything as long as it's textual. However, let's think realistically. What kind of things can you actually transfer that would make sense? Code, Java, C, etc. Can be XML, can be JSON. JSON is going to be the most commonly used for web applications, so that's going to one we're going to be using. XML is the province of web services, and XML is a very, very good notation. However, because 90% of what you're going to do with a web application is going to consume it via a JavaScript framework on the other end, JSON is a native format for that, and so it just sort of works so well. So there was no reason to use anything other than JSON. I want to talk briefly about the code. We don't see this, and we're never going to see this in our class, but microservices are built on the concept that you can go get data, and then you can go get code to manipulate the data. It's actually pretty cool, but we're beyond the scope of this class. But you're going to see Spring talk about this in the Spring documentation. If you end up reading the Spring documentation, you might find references to code. So let's learn a little bit about JSON. What we need to know about JSON, we don't need to actually write it out. We'll never need to write it out. You'll never need to type out JSON. We have tools to help us do these things, but we do need to know what it is. JSON is an open standard file format and data interchange format. So it's essentially designed for transfer between two entities on a computer. Usually, though, both ends are computers as opposed to people, but it's supposed to be human readable text. So you're supposed to be able to make sense of it. So that's useful for programmers to know that there's a problem or not a problem. And it's essentially attribute value pairs and array data types. Anything serializable can go into a JSON data type. Now, good news is, we're talking about the things that we did in a database. So we kept it simple. We said string, integer, doubles, floats, string, and that sort of stuff. All those things kind of format nicely in JSON, so that's not a huge issue for us. JSON is language independent. It was derived from JavaScript, but many modern programming languages include code to generate and parse JSON format data. The official internet media type for JSON is application/JSON. And JSON file names use the extension .json. Now, we don't care about that, but Spring is going to take whatever we're trying to send, and it's going to transcribe it into JSON for us. So we do need to know what we're talking about because we are going to need to look at it. And we'll talk about that today. What about JSON do I need to know? Well, actually, we don't need to know that much, but we just need to know is we're using the media type. It's fortunately a data type that Angular expects, so we can just use it easily without needing it to convert anything on the client. So we don't have to do anything with it. We don't have to like put an adapter in place. We don't have to do anything. It's a native format for Angular. Boom, happy. Also, on the server side, the service API will automatically convert everything into JSON automatically. So what I mean by that is, and I said automatically twice, actually is what I should have said the first time, but by default, Spring is going to use JSON. So by default, we don't have to do anything, which is super useful. We can force it to use XML. We can force it to use other data types if we choose to. But remember, we'd be swimming upstream again. However, your basic ability to troubleshoot what's going wrong depends on your ability to read it. So that's why we're going to discuss the format, not because we're going to need to write out JSON, not because but you do need to be able to understand what is being transmitted. So you can see if, is the server not sending what it needs to send? Is the client not munching it the way it should munch it, right? So when the client eats it and tries to interpret it, is it eating it correctly and doing what it needs to do? So it gives you a means of identifying what's happening so that you can look at it and see what's wrong. And so syntax rules is derived from JavaScript object notation. JSON is JavaScript object notation. So data is always in name value pairs, pretty simple. Data is always separated by commas. Curly braces hold objects, and square brackets hold arrays. Those 4 things. Just remember those 4 things. Now, these 4 things can be put in combination of those, right? But we'll see some examples in a minute. So, for example, name value pairs. A name value pair exists of a field name, in double quotes, followed by a colon, followed by a value. So, for instance, name, right? It's in quotes. Then there's a colon. Then there's and unfortunately, there's 2 of them. There should not be. And then there's a value in quotes as well. It says Michael. You can typically get away with things like this, where the name is not quoted, single quotes or double quotes. We don't care about that, and JavaScript object notation will be happy with that, but it really should be in both the value and the name be in quotes. And it should be name value, by the way. I kept saying it backwards. Object and comma. So here's where we define an object. So we have a name field, we have an age field, and we have a city field. We define the object as a group by putting everything in curly braces, and you see name, and then you see Mike in quotes, then you see a comma. The comma indicates that we move from one name value pair to the next. And so you have age 45. You'll note that numbers are not quoted. And then comma, we move to the next name value pair, city, colon, Chicago. The commas separate the field, and the 3 fields together make up an object. How do we know that? Curly braces. Objects can also be given a name. It can be a named object, such as student here. Ta-da! And that's useful if you have an array or you have certain objects and you want to differentiate them. We don't care. We'll see this as we go along, but we generally don't care about the names, named objects. We typically use arrays just like we might a scalar, a single variable, but usually we use square braces. So for instance, students, you have an array named students, colon, it's a name value pair. So this is a name, and the value is square braces, and then you have the string Anna, comma, string Bob, comma, string Carol. So students name, the value associated with students is going to be an array consisting of Anna, Bob, and Carol. Yay. You'll note the curly braces. Are the curly braces entirely necessary? No, not really. Not for an array, but this is indicating that this is a student object consisting of an array. So sort of extra, if you will, but this is how we define an array. Remember, we're never going to have to type these things out. So it's not as if you're going to need to type these out. So what data types do exist? A string, those need to be quoted. A number, integer, double, no quotes there. An object, we already know how to define an object, curly braces. An array, square braces, a Boolean can be either true or false, and its value will literally be true or false. It has the same name value. We don't typically quote true or false, because we don't need to. And then a value can be null, right? Indicating that it's not there. So let's see. Oh, that's it. Yeah, because we don't need to actually write it out. I'm going to show you some examples when we actually have our endpoints back basically working. There's no reason for you to go into detail and learn how to write these out. You just need to be able to look at them. So we're going to use Spring to develop a series of REST endpoints that can be assumed by Angular. REST is going to be the representational state that we've been talking about all this time is going to be completely handled by JSON. Everything that we're going to send back and forth is going to be JSON. Anything Angular sends us is going to be in JSON. Everything we consume in Spring is going to be JSON. Everything we send to Angular is going to be in JSON. Everything Angular consumes is going to be JSON. So it's pretty simple. That's a representational state we're looking at. Since Spring is self-contained, we'll need to ensure that we include web-MVC to our dependencies so we can include the necessary web elements. Wait, what? Remember I told you we're using Spring Boot, right? Well, since we're using Spring Boot, we need to have the dependency set up ahead of time. We'll talk about how we do that in just a second, but that is very important. No matter what project you're working on, your independent project, your homeworks, anything having to do with Spring, better have that dependency installed. And the other thing too, is we'll talk about this in a little detail when we get going, but you're going to find that having a dependency on when you're setting it up makes everything easier, right? So it's very important to name things the first time and get those dependencies right the first time. It's just so much easier than trying to fix it after the fact. A lot of times we don't want to abandon what we've already done. We spent 20 minutes fixing this, so like we don't want to abandon it. But a lot of times it's easier just to go ahead and create a new project and then copy the code from the project A to project B. We'll see that as I go along as well. So for all Spring applications, you should start with Spring Initializer. The Initializer offers a fast way to pull in all the dependencies and does a lot of the setup for us. In fact, it actually creates a Maven project. We're going to create hello world application today, but it essentially brings you to a hello world type place where you can actually begin. Remember, Spring Boot's going to do 90% of the work for us, so that we want to do it. We want the system to do most of the work for us. So we want to use the initializer tool effectively so that we can do it. And the other thing about the initializer tools you're going to love is it's really simple to use. There's no like tricks or issues with it. So we talked about the fundamentals of Spring Framework. We talked about inversion control. I realize that may not be super cemented until we actually use it. We discussed REST and REST services. We explained the architectural style of applications using REST services. That's where we get into those REST and HTTP methods. Those are going to become very important for what we're doing. And we explained JSON and its primary use as a medium. All right. So for more information, you can look here. Spring and Spring guides are the new thing, I think, and JSON as well. There's a lot of information on spring.io and spring.io/guides, but be aware the way they do things is a little strange sometimes because they don't always have Angular endpoints, or they don't always do this way or that way. It's very important that you follow along with what I'm doing. There's a massive amount of code online, and you really need to do it my way. For obvious reasons, we want to get good grades. So please be aware that there's a ton of code online, but it might not be doing what you need it to do. So be aware of that. All right, so let's get started. So Spring Initializer, how do we get to Spring Initializer? So what I do, I know the websites because I know the website, but if you type in Spring Initializer in Google, ta-da, Spring Initializer comes up. It's actually start.spring.io. Oh, come on. Seriously. Yeah, of course it's gonna be slow. One day it was down during class. I was teaching this class and it was down. Like actually down, like it was not accessible. So what I did was I created an old Spring, let's call it, and then just went with that. So not ideal. Okay, so this is our Spring Initializer. It does a bunch of things for us. So let's let it look at it before we do anything. You have language options: Java, Kotlin, Groovy. Remember, we're Java developers, so we're going to stick with Java. We're using NetBeans primarily in the course. NetBeans primarily uses Maven underneath, so we're going to stick with Maven. Spring can be used for a variety of things. So we talked about the techniques that we're using aren't going to be very different for what we do when we want to create a cell phone application these days, right? If we want to use a database cell phone application. So we can use Gradle and Kotlin and do all sorts of stuff as well. Then we want to look down here. So Spring Boot, which version of Spring Boot do we want? We always want the one without parentheses. So your option are 2.7.4 and 2.6.12. What are these other guys? Snapshots typically involve development versions. In other words, they're working on new versions like 3.0 or 2.75. And so they take a snapshot. And a snapshot identifies some changes that were made and so forth. And so it's all versioned and so forth. So we want the ones without the versions. We want stable versions only. So 2.7.4 is the one we're going to use primarily through the class. If that changes, we'll keep using the most up-to-date one. And then you have project metadata, group, artifact name, description, package name. So this is where things get a little wonky. Okay, so I'm going to go over that last. Packaging, we always want to stick with jar. Java, stick with version that you have. 17 is the one I'm going to use. And then we have add dependencies over here. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to change this to Roosevelt.edu, right? And then I'm going to go CST 367. Now look at how the package name changed. It's demo. Let's go change the project thing to 926. You'll note that it also changed. You see the name change, the artifact change, and the package name change. Group and artifact. Focus on those. Those are how we change the package names for the final thing. Now you can change the description to whatever you want, and it has no real impact on me, right? So the add dependencies is kind of cool. There's a lot of things you can add here, right? Lots and lots of things. You see JDBC API, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. You even have SQL drivers, right? You actually have MySQL driver. Ta-da! All sorts of fun stuff that you can add right from here. The most important thing is the web, right? And the web MVC type web is Spring Web. There's nothing particularly heinous about that. You just add Spring Web. And then there you go. All right, before we generate it, I want to explore so you can see what it looks like, what the packages will look like. It's going to create a 926 zip. And here's the Maven files. What's interesting, if you look at the POM is going to have some dependencies associated with it. We said we wanted the Spring Web. Boop, there it is, with the right package names and all those things. And then we're going to have a source file. You'll note that main Java edu Roosevelt 6367. Oh yeah, because of 926, right? So it has an application, it has application properties and test. We're going to ignore test for all intents and purposes. We have a static and template. We'll play with those later. Today, we don't care about that. We only care about the Java application that gets run. So we're going to go ahead and close that, and we're going to generate it. 926. And I kind of screwed up a little bit, so it'll be fine. Come on, Ruth. Come on, Ruth. Come on, Ruth. I screwed up a little bit. I'll explain why. I usually create two. I create one that's just a hello world. And then I create one that's actually going to be representative of our final project thing that we work on. So then we open it and it says unloadable. Oh no, this is normal. This is because it doesn't have the things it needs to do for Maven. So we're going to go here and resolve project problems. And you click resolve. All it's going to do is download the appropriate dependencies. That's it. See, it says priming 926. And believe it or not, every time if you use a different version, things like that, you'll actually have a different issues. Yeah, taking a minute. Of course, it's taking a minute. So the other thing I have open while we're waiting for this is the stuff from 919. Hopefully, you're already working on your homework, but we're going to use that later today to get data for our project. So this doesn't usually take any, like it's all it's got to do is download the dependencies. Yep, because you don't automatically have the org Spring Framework boot on the Spring Web jar. You typically have those because this is a new installation of NetBeans. So really it's got to download it, but I think there's, hopefully my internet connection is still good. I could actually get them from somewhere else. I just really would not want to do that. I have an old projects that are open. So worst case scenario, I can still show you the code. It's just unfortunately, is my internet being hanky? Why are you not loading? So there we go. Ta-da! Just gotta download the packages. And I don't know why it was taking so long to even start. That is weird because I have an internet connection, so I'm on Zoom. So if my internet connection was blanking, then it would whatchamacallit. Now, good news is once this is installed, you're going to see me do another one and it won't take nearly as long. But every now and again, you'll still have this. Anytime there's a different version of the web MVC that it wants to use, it's going to actually require you to download it. So I'm hungry. My wife made honey cake because Rosh Hashanah, and it's very good. I should not be dipping into it so often, but man, it's good. So anyway, this does take a second. It usually doesn't take this long, but it actually does take this long, but I think I do something else while this happens. I'm trying to think what else I do. I don't think I do. There we go. All right, so while we're downloading it, we're actually going to show you something else because I'm tired of waiting for that. All right, so I'm going to type Google because I like to go to Google to find things. Apparently my wife likes to shop at Ann Taylor Loft. So we're going to look for Postman. Please, Mr. Postman, leave me a letter. I'll explain why in a minute. Postman is an API platform. That's what we want. We want to download it. So, hey, I might already have it installed. I'm not sure I do. But you're going to want to install it. And you go, what do you mean? Well, remember how we're going to have the API? When we're using get, we can just use get from a web browser. We don't have to do anything special. But for post, put, delete, all those other guys, we don't have a mechanism to do that. So we really want to download the Postman app that will allow us to do that. So postman.com/downloads, and it's a very good API tool that we'll be using to verify that we're getting what we expect to get out of what's called, and it's free. I think it requires an email address, so they'll send you emails every now and again, but it is free. All right, let's look at the source packages. And then you get this. What? This is all the code that you have. Remember, it's designed to let you do a variety of things, so there's not much there. I do want to talk about other sources. Eventually, we will fool around in here. Not today, but eventually we will. One of the things we'll do is we'll play around with the port numbers and stuff like that. I may do that today. I doubt it, because I usually only have a few minutes, so I do a couple things. So I don't know what we do today, but you see all the things that had to download. It's not just one file, it's a bunch. You also have, because you have the Spring Boot Starter Web, you also get all the Tomcat stuff as well. So it's got Tomcat associated with it. Booyah! And then project files. There's not really a whole lot of actual project files. This is the most important thing that you're going to play with. Let me double check that it's actually downloaded Postman. I want it to stop. And this right here does all the work. As you can see, all this does is starts the application. It says Spring application.run, application class, and args. That's all it does, is actually start the Spring application, right? Creates a thread, which starts it. That really, I don't want to go into this line. We don't have to do anything with this 9, 10, 11 code, 9, 10, 11. This is the most important part. And you go, wait, what? It's the annotation framework. So what do we mean by that? So Spring Boot application, this annotation that says at Spring Boot application, it's an annotation indicating that this file is a Spring Boot application. So what does that actually do? Spring Boot developers like their apps to use auto configurations, component scan, and be able to define extra configuration in their application class. Wait, what? So that Spring Boot application annotation that we see on line 6 actually enables auto configuration. It enables the auto configuration process where it looks for things that it needs to configure. It also enables component scan. So it looks at all the different types of things, right, that can be loaded into a Spring application. We're going to play with controllers in a minute. And so it's going to look for controllers. And if it finds one, it's going to try to configure it into its framework. And then, of course, it enables configuration as well. So if you want to do some configuration things in this application, you can do it pretty quickly. The Spring Boot application's equivalent to using each one of these separate, but we don't care about that. This is how we're going to run our application. I'm not going to run it yet because it doesn't actually do anything, but if I click run, it will actually run and start a Tomcat instance and all the things. Watch. I wasn't going to click run because it takes a minute, right? So we have Spring Boot, and then you see it's actually, oops, I want to allow access, by the way. Anyway, and we see the application starting. We do see the Tomcat starting, org Apache Catalina core, that's Tomcat. We see Tomcat starting with the application slash. We see a server web application start, and then we see an embedded Tomcat server start again, and then the final application starts. This is just boot, Spring Boot doing its stuff. That's all that's happening. Spring Boot is just starting up. There's nothing overly special about that whatsoever. It will identify what port numbers they're start on, so we'll play with this a little bit, but without actually doing anything, it'll just, right? We didn't actually do anything. It doesn't do anything for us, and it doesn't respond to any endpoints at this point. But it's pretty simply actually creating the system for us. So that's pretty awesome. So let's actually do some work. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new class, not a main class, just a new class. and I'm going to call it student control, or no, because we're going to come back and we're going to say this is the hello world controller. Okay, so unlike traditional methods, we're not going to do that. We're not going to extend something. We're going to say rest controller. And by saying rest controller, what we're going to do is indicate that this is a rest controller. Now, what does the rest controller do? The rest controller is a convenience annotation that is itself annotated with controller and response body. The controller, it just indicates that this is a controller. It's a web controller. So when you have endpoints, this is where the endpoints should be inside of a REST controller. Annotation serves as specialization of component, allowing for implementation classes to be auto-detected, through class path gain. It's typically used in handling methods based on the request mapping. So wait, what? So this is the controller that's going to take request maps and map them to actual methods in Java. And you go, wait, what? Yeah, I think we need to go ahead and get started. And you're like, wait, what? So request mapping is an annotation for mapping web requests onto methods in request handling. So let's go ahead and have our first one. So we're going to go ahead and say, oops, get mapping. And what we're going to map is hello world. And what are we going to map that to? That's the lemma, right? So what are we actually mapping this to? We're going to actually map it to a method, public string. Sorry, my nose is going crazy. Okay, so what a request mapping actually does is a request comes in to the web server as /hello world, right? So localhost port 880, whatever port it is, /hello world, it's going to respond with this method. That's all that does is it maps. Request mappings essentially map requests from the web server onto method signatures. And you can see the get mapping in our case doesn't have any input, right? So we don't have any input to deal with. We can return a string. We're happy with that. We can return anything. We'll see a couple examples. I won't do a lot here because I think we have plenty more things to do. But this is it, right? And you go, wait a second. You can't tell me that you're going to create a hello world application by just creating a single method, what, 3 lines of code, right? Well, maybe 5 lines of code if you count 14, right? This hello world controller, right? It's five-ish lines of code. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code. And then you're going to say that's a hello world controller, right? There's no way, right? Here you go. And then you see the web application that start on port 880. Postman is downloaded, so good for that. I'm going to go localhost 8080, and what we say, hello, is it uppercase? I don't remember. I think it's uppercase. And ta-da, there's a string. And you go, wait. That's it? That's it, right? And you're like, that can't be it. Well, remember I told you a couple things. One is the use of the framework and its tools and techniques and annotations and so forth are actually what makes us do work very, very quickly. Now, in our case, we're just returning a string. That's not what we're going to return 90% of the time. 90% of the time, we're going to return something. Yes, we're going to return a something. So let's go ahead and create a something. So first things first, you can have a it's a Java, the hello world controller is a Java class, and as a result of having a Java class is in fact, sorry, I apologize. I have to actually create the class student. I don't have a student. Do I have a student over here? I do not. Shoot. All right, let me create a student class real quick. Actually, shoot. Yeah, let's create a quick student class. Should have done something else, but there we go. Come on, Ruth. Going fast, too fast for you. All right. So now we got that. We want to insert all of our stuff, getters and setters, bink. I don't care about anything else, no constructors. I really don't care. Remember, in what we're going to be doing throughout this class, we're going to use this as data access objects. So we rarely will actually need to do anything fancy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and return example. I'm going to set as SID to 3. Set name Michael. Set major CS. GPA 3.0. That's not a weird, what you call it? That's literally my GPA from college, by the way, for those of you who don't know. But anyway, so we're going to return get mapping, and we're going to return that student, right? Nothing spectacular. Get example student. And I am typing this out crazy so that when we do later things, we won't. Okay. So again, it's really important to remember that you can return anything, right? So here I am returning an example. Yes. And you can have a controller. Your controller can have a constructor. That's the word I was looking for, and private variables. Every now and again we use that. It's pretty rare though. We try not to do that because we want it to be configured. So we don't like to do that, but there you go. It is marketed as red, but here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Go. All right. That's my kid's school. And I already forgot the name of that method. Get example student. Boom. Command failed to start. That's because it was already listening. It's already running, so it's already listening. So we're going to go ahead and kill it, and then we're going to start it again. Note that your the operating system provides that port numbers and make sure port numbers don't overwrite each other. So even if you kill it, it might take a second before you can run it again. So just be aware. Okay. Then we got our running application, and we said get example student. Ta-da! Automatically transmits our object into trying to think of the word JSON. Into a JSON object. We're going to see that in a minute, but boom, that's pretty simple. This is very, very simple stuff. We don't usually use just returning students or strings. We're going to see that we typically return something called a response entity, and that response entity is going to allow us to manipulate the resource. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to create a new package. That's mostly what I do when I create a new controller is I actually create a new package. In my case, I'm going to create a student package, and I'm going to create a new Java class, and I'm going to create a new student controller. I usually name the object, right? And then I'm going to copy the student into this package as well, in case I want to make changes to it. Right, get rid of you. There's really no changes I'm going to make to it at this point, but I do want to actually have a separate thing. That way, if I do make changes to it later on, and I probably will, we want to make sure that this other stuff works, right? The hello world stuff still works. So I want to do that. Okay, this is why I had, I'm sorry, give me a second. This is why I have 919 open. Remember our queries? Ta-da! We're only going to do gets today. So, but we wanted to do the setup. And so, wait, what? So our query, right? We do a connection. we're going to go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to go ahead and create a connection object here. I'm going to set it to null. You'll see why in a minute. And you go, wait, what? And public student controller. And then boom, I'm going to set up my connection. Ta-da! Using, and we can actually do throws. We don't want to, by the way. Did I mistype that? I don't think I did. I'm gonna do it here. Oh, yeah, I have to import it. That was the problem earlier. All right, so I don't care about throwing a SQL exception. Yes. This is a bad idea. We don't do this in real life. We'll talk about how we actually do data access next week. And by the way, that'll have us caught up. We'll actually be caught up, by the way, by the end of next week. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's have a more realistic thing. We're gonna have students and just leave it that. Public, instead of returning a student array, I am going to return a student array, just so you can see it. I'm actually going to want to do something else, but I'm going to initially do a student array. So I'm going to do array list of student, right? Because that works. Get students. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this students A. I'll explain why in a minute. So what I'm actually going to do, and this is going to seem stupid at first, but it's actually important. I'm actually going to create two endpoints. Since I haven't shown you an array list of students, I wanted to do that. So I'm going to actually go get an array list of students. I'm going to execute my query to go get all the students, and I'm going to create students based on these things. Bink, bink, bink. Ta-da-da. And then when I create students based on this, I'm just going to create an array list to return it. Okay, so we're going to go think. There we go, return roster. That should kill 90% of my errors. And then we're going to go to the query where it actually goes and gets them. Shit, we don't have one where it just goes and gets them. All right, you know what? This will work. Not exactly, but it'll work. You go, what do you mean it won't work exactly? I'll explain in a minute. So, okay. First of all, we have try catches 60 different places to Sunday. We don't want that. We want throws, exception. Now we don't have a try catch anywhere. Bink, bink. Yes, this is not ideal. We'll talk about how to deal with that later. But we also don't want this select where nonsense either. We just want that. And that's fine. That's what we get. Equal string. Get result set. And I'm actually doing this just to reinforce the SQL stuff we learned the other day. We wouldn't do this in real life. Okay. Student S equals new student. S dot set SID is equal to rs dot get ints SID. And you're like, wait, what? Why would that be not? Why would that be weird, people? Right? This is what you want to do. Oops, don't copy that part. See, copy and paste is not always your friend. Stupid shit. All right, there we go. And then set major. Bink, bink. And All right. Once we're finished with this, we'll actually have a way to create students based on this, no matter what we're doing. So it'll be actually easy. And then we add the student to the roster and we're happy and done, right? We're not outputting, right? We don't want to output. We just want to finish the while loop and return the roster and we are done. Now, I'm just returning as an array list. Again, we don't do this. I'll explain why in a minute, but with this, it's going to be fine. It is actually fine. Everything's fine. No, seriously, it's fine to return things that you know you're going to get a result for, such as get all students. Even if the array is empty, you're going to get an empty array, which is fine. That, I mean, is not going to have any major impact in, ooh, look at this, boom. I couldn't find the class when it tried to create the SQL connection. Look, no SQL driver found because I didn't fix the dependency. Oops. So my SQL. Let's go back to the list here. It's not com MySQL management. If I remember the name of it, I would have just typed the name in it. There it is. MySQL connector Java, and really anyone works. I'm going to use the most common. I'm going to use the most. I tend to use the local one, but I just use the first one you come to. The second I install that, it should run. Ta-da! Not very exciting. We haven't failed an endpoint yet, which we're going to need to do in a minute. So we need to make sure that we have an endpoint overlap so that we can have a problem there. So now we just want students, but I named it students A. Boom, here's my database. Yeah, that's useful. You can see that really well, right? No, you can't really, but this particular browser does not format the for us. It just doesn't. But you can, and we don't care about this now. Go into developer tools. I'm trying to find it. Nope. Brain farting where it is. Yeah, I'm brain farting. You can use this as a mechanism to actually find the thing, and it would actually look a little better through this. But no, this is one of the reasons we're going to talk about using Postman when we get there. We may not get there today because we're going to do a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. But okay, go back to what we're saying earlier. All right, so with the student controller, get students. This just gets all students. Even if there were no students to return, it would be fine. A lot of our get queries are going to work out just fine, except for some of them. Okay, and you go, wait, what do you mean? So when I select all students that have a GPA less than 2 and whatever, an empty array is totally fine to return. Totally fine to return. But when I'm trying to get a single student, I need that student, right? Or I need to know that that student didn't exist. Getting a list of students might not work in that. You know, getting an empty list when I need to do something with it is not ideal. So we want to make sure that we actually return something different. And I'm going to show you how to do that just now. Okay. We just use something called a response entity, right? And then it takes whatever you're going to give it, right? So in our case, it's going to take the array list. right? And then you return new response into roster. And you do more than that. I'm sorry. I don't remember exactly how the code is written. Just give me a second. I'm trying to remember, and I'm brain farting hardcore. Brain farting's fine. It's just unfortunately sometimes you're in front of people when you brain fart. Ha. Yeah, I have it close. Not spelling it correctly. Okay, so roster HTTP status. And I need to do the import first. Okay, so when I do the response, I can tell it to use a response. In our case, I'm going to use OK. And so I can send it with a directed HTTP response if I use response entity. With response entity, I can also change headers and all sorts of things. So we typically use response entity for anything. Why is it saying it is already? Oh, yeah, because I need to name it B. So for almost everything we do, we're going to use response entity rather than just the array list or whatever. Now, when you're returning something that is perfectly fine to return an empty array or an empty list, like queries, that type of stuff, it's totally fine to use just the array list. But you're going to see me default to using this more often than not. So I'll use this even if things, if I want to change the method and later on, I don't have that ability to do it if I don't have the response entity. So it's really valuable to have it. All right, let's send, let's give it something to complain about. So this is two endpoints that with the same name. You note the Java methods are different, but it's going to try to map two things to the same name. And it's not going to like it, right? It's not going to be happy. No happiness for you. Okay, so this is going to actually try to run. You see it's going to run. Boom. That's when the exception fails. Not before, right? When it's trying to configure itself. There's already a student controller bean method. B is mapped. And then you say there's already a student controller B mapped, right? So what's actually happening is it's actually ambiguous mapping cannot map student controller get students A because it's already mapped to this. Ta-da! That's it, right? That's indicating that you have the wrong controller. It's going to the wrong place. So those are overlap. You don't want to have those. All right, let's get to a method that's going to take a variable. So we're going to go with students, and then we're going to go with a specific student ID. So we're going to go SID, right? Now, you can't just write SID. You actually have to, I'm sorry, I have this backwards. I do absolutely have this backwards. I apologize. Why do I have this wrong thing? Here it is. I do have it backwards. That is fine. 161, 160. Yes. It's not just like this. You actually have to put it in brackets. Okay. So now we're going to map this. And what we want to do is map this to, I know, right? We're going to get rid of this throws exception eventually. We're going to use a framework. So eventually we're going to use a framework like JPA or JDBC. So we're not going to need to worry about throwing exceptions later on. All right, so now we're not going to return a relay list. We're just going to return a student and get student by SID, right? Because we're returning student by SID, and we have to take an int SID. This is not that simple. We actually have to figure out a way to get this variable to be this variable. So how do we do that? We annotate it. How do you annotate it? Use a path variable. So that's what we're trying to use. So what do? Path variable. Then you have to put it in indicates indications and say which one you're actually doing. In our case, what are we mapping? SID, see it's in quotes, right? We're going to map it SID and it's going to map to that integer. Those data types have to match. It has to be able to convert it. You're going to see me do some things to make it screw up. That's why I use the integer here. And then instead of this, it's going to say where SID equals. This is not ideal. This is not great, but it will in fact work. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get a student. You're going to add it to a roster, right? Nope. We're going to get rid of that because we don't want that. We just want student S equals new student, right? This is where the response entity comes in, by the way. What happens if there is no student with that given SID? What happens? We'll talk about that in a minute. All right. So if there is a string, it's going to set the it cannot be converted to string. Wait, what? All right, I must be confused here. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's confused. I'm not sure why it's returning that, but anyway, right? We have to find a way to find out whether or not this actually returned a result. Couple of ways we can do it. We can actually select the count, get the count, like what we did with before, and get the count and determine whether or not it returned a row. However, you know what else we can do? This result set will return nothing. It'll be empty. So this will never happen. We could just simply do this. I don't recommend this. We actually should do the count, but we should actually do it. But if it gets in here, that means a row was in there. So now here we can check to see count is greater than 0. Sorry. I'll just use my mouse. That means there's a row. Then we go return new, blah, blah, blah. Oops. Right. Except just student. Right. With the HTTP status. Else. Okay, you're going to do the exact same thing. Except this is not, you're not going to actually have a student. So you're going to leave it as null. And you're going to change the HTTP status to something more appropriate, such as not found. Not found, by the way, is a 404 response, by the way. In case you're interested, it is in fact a 404 response. It isn't student, it is S at this point. Sorry. Another thing I could do is make this null and then check to see if a student is null here, if that would work too. But we typically would actually do is a select count where student is blah, 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 and then have the database do all the work. If the count is for more than 1, then do something. If it's not, don't. But this is a perfect example of when we might want an S versus, a status response. What we're going to find later when we do our Angular code is that Angular will allow us to use the status response to determine what the outcome of our code should be pretty simply. So let's go ahead and by the way, this is the end result of our work. There's a couple other things I'm going to show you today, but most of what we're going to do is just use what we already did a couple of different ways. So this was not starting anyway, so we should be able to run it. If you haven't guessed, yes, this is going to be the beginning of the end of your next homework. Your final project will in fact absolutely involve a Tomcat server, by the way. Okay, so just so we can see, Students gives us the same results. I'm just picking a random SID and I'm going to put it at the end. This one should exist because it's in the list. And so sure enough, Jesus Winston, his major is data analytics. We're about to change that major to data science, by the way, SID, so forth. What about a random number? Screw around and go with 3. You get this no local page cannot be found. You get an HTTP error. And you go, wait a second, HTTP error. What does that mean? An HTTP, that means the student was not found. That's all that means. That student did not exist in the list. And we get that regardless of whatever we entered. Now, what about when I enter in Luke? Luke, I am your father. Although not actually said, we get something called a white label error page. This is what we call a bad request. It's a status 400. Do you remember our HTTP status here? A 400 indicates that the other end was not able to get to it. I entered in Luke, I am your father. That is in fact a string. And what happens when I enter a string and it's expecting a integer? It cannot convert it. And there go, it throws an exception. Now, what about if I use a really giant number, right? Because then, right, you get the same result, right? Because it's too big to be an integer, so it can't convert it to an integer. But you get this bad request because it can't convert it. It's actually happening before it gets to the Java code, so there's nothing we can do to fix it. What about 1.3? You get the same thing, right? It's got to be able to convert it to this integer SID. So it's kind of a validation mechanism, but not a really great one. But just be aware. Right now, we're not fixing errors. We're just kind of pointing out. Additionally, going back to what we were saying earlier, when we're dealing with Angular, we will be able to use the status codes to actually return or to change the way the thing works on the client side. So we don't need to actually look at the responses in those cases. We can actually use the response type. So that 400 is actually super useful. We'll be able to handle that and do something with that data. That means somebody may have entered in incorrect data or whatever. All right, so let's do a query. We'll get all the students that meet certain criteria. So let's go with major. We want that major to be entered. Right? So we want that major to be entered. So we're going to go here. We're going to go major. And this seems the most appropriate thing to do, right? So we're going to go get the array list. And we're going to go say by major, string major. And because I like to copy and paste, I'm going to go copy and paste. And I'm going to change this to major. String, almost everything can be converted to a string, so this should never have a problem. Couple of things. I'm not actually going to do anything because this is going to fail, but we'll see why in a minute. And I'm going to go where major equals plus major, right? Yay. All right. It's going to fail. And you're going to go, wait, why is it going to fail? I'll show you. Oops, I need to kill this other one. All right, hopefully I killed it fast enough. We'll see. No, didn't die. Okay, let's go with 1.3. Internal server error 500. And you go, wait, what the hell? Ambiguous handler methods map for students 1.3. Wait, what? Okay, so this is the same problem as before. When a request comes in, we can't determine if it goes to SID or major because look at them, they're identical. When it goes to convert it, it doesn't know whether to convert for this mapping or this mapping, but these mappings are clearly different. So what can we do? We have to differentiate it some kind of way. So if I say by major, put a by major in between, right? I changed the URL like this. And I'm going to get, you need to stop it to restart it, right? And then I'm going to run it again. See, no error because they actually were different. When it was trying to figure out what it was different, but then it can't figure it out. So now if I type main major and say CS as an example, right? Oops, I still get an error page. What the hell? Unknown column CS in where clause. Did I screw this up? I did. Students by major. Huh. Select star from student where major equals. Huh. Ha. I think I know what I did wrong. All right. I hate my life. Hate my life. My life sucks. Okay. Think I figured out what I did wrong. Let's see if that was it. That wasn't the error I was hoping for, by the way. I was, first of all, I wasn't expecting an error. I was expecting that to just work. But more importantly, this is why we don't do this mechanism. Because we have to be very careful how we do our code. Okay, we've got about 2 more things I'm going to be able to do. But by major, and you see there's nobody there. And you go, why is there nobody there? Because remember, I changed them all to computer science. There you go. There's a bunch of people. What about DA? Hey, there you go. These are all the DA students. Yes. And we can go back and forth with this now that we have a major. And then it can separate the SID from the student ID from the major because we gave it a separation. We changed the way that it works. So now it knows that this student's major is different from this guy. All right, let's do one more. And let's just, for shits and giggles, do major and GPA. And I want to talk about why this is a huge problem. Don't do this, right? Don't do this. I'm going to still do this. And we're just going to add n GPA. And I'm going to copy the path variable. And I'm going to comma here. And I go double GPA, right? And then I'm just going to change this. Equals plus. I need a space here because there was no space at the end. And I'm going to say n GPA is greater than or less than. Let's do less than. And we'll say less than here. Okay. GPA less than plus GPA. Boom. Yes. If you're ever in doubt, I'm going to show you something in not this class because we don't have time to do it today. Well, we might actually, but I doubt it. Okay, so this is a problem because of parsing. So what's going to happen is, and I'm not going to do it because I want to quickly move through. So what I want to point out is this is going to parse major. If major can have a slash in it, it'll never find the GPA. So we need to have something in here between so like GPA less than, anything here that cannot exist in major is necessary to make sure we can differentiate between GPA and major. But yeah, this will actually work. I'm not going to run it because I'm kind of running out of time. I want to do one other thing. You know, we're going to, hopefully some of you are familiar with Logger. All right, I'm using the wrong logger. So give me a second. I have the code here for it somewhere. I just want to show you how to get a system out print line. That's going to be useful. System out print line is freaking not at all useful if you don't do it properly. And you go, wait, what? So if you do system out print line, where is system out print line going? It goes to the console, but the bad news is the console is where? Exactly, right? So the console goes essentially nowhere. And I have the code, but I don't have the code. Yes? The good news is I'm missing a page. That means a page fell somewhere or it's backwards. Let me double check here. There we go. Found it. Found it. Yeah. All right. So all we need to do is set up a logger. So easiest way to do that is private static class. No. Final logger equals new logger factory. And I'm going to let it add import for the SV. That's the one we want. And then I'm gonna go. Oh, still not happy. I don't want the SVJ. We're still not happy. Which logger factory should I be using? Yeah, I'm using the right one. SLF4J, logger for Java. It's the one I want. Why are we not happy here? Oh, there's no new to this. Right? And then I just want to get a logger. And the way to do this is actually just name it the class. So I want to name it the student controller class. And you'll see why in a minute. Okay. Okay. And this is actually sounds so stupid, but is so valuable. So let's suppose we go back to major and I want to log the major. I just want the major to be logged, nothing else. I just want to log. So I get the logger and excuse me, logger dot, and then I can say debug, I can say error, I can say info. I'm going to stick with info right now. And I'm just going to log the major. I'm going to indicate that get and then I'm screwing this up hardcore. Give me 1 second. Think. It takes a string, right? Boom. I'm going to stop it. And we're going to run it. I'm going to use the logger a lot more going forward because we're going to start to get errors pretty quickly. And we want logging to see, like when we're working with our web application, sometimes you want to see what's actually the server thinks it's getting without having to do a whole bunch of mediocre things in the middle. So this is pretty useful. So I'm going to go by major. I'm just going to, I think I used IT. I have no idea. Okay, but it should have logged it, right? And that's what you see here. It's using the logger system, which is what this is using by default. It makes it really easy for you to see what you're looking at. If you use error, those will show up usually in red. Not ideal for most of what we need. Use debug. They only come up in the certain situations. We probably don't want that. Trace and warn, same idea. Most of what we want to do is system out type stuff is logger.info. We're going to see the error when we do the error management stuff. But for now, the big things that we did was we have a simple mapping for a controller to map URLs to actual methods. We have the array, array list, and the student types are fine when you know you're going to get a response. If you're not sure you're going to get a response, you should always use response entity. That way you can adapt if the response entity is going to be For example, for the get an individual student, if that student doesn't exist, you can say not found. And if the student does exist, you can just return it with an OK. That response entity allows you to determine it. We also talked about the URLs. The URLs are really important. Get a student ID. We talked about how to get a path variable. We talked about how to separate the path variable so it knows what it's getting when it's getting it. And then we talked about having multiple path variables. So the big thing about multiple path variables is when you have a path variable, it tries to convert a string into a major. But it also, if the major can exist with this in it, it'll never find the GPA. So you've got to put something in between that cannot exist inside the major. Usually a simple string is more than enough to do that. And that is what we got today. Next class, we're going to talk about, of course, we're going to get to Postman. I'm going to start by installing Postman. The second thing we're going to do is start our post, puts, and deletes. And then we'll have a fully functioning system. We'll also deal with exceptions. We'll deal with optional parameters. Yeah, I don't want to do too much because when we start going into spring data next week, by the way, we get into spring data next week. When we get into spring data, we won't have, you see, I have this SQL and then I have the connection, I have to create it. Then we have to deal with these throw exceptions. We won't have to deal with any of that next week. We're going to be using the JDBC built-in system or the JPA system, Java Persistent Architecture. All right, that is that. I apologize for being remote last minute. I actually thought Rosh Hashanah was next week. It turns out it's this week. And so surprise, surprise. And then there was some confusion about my wife and I were discussing how we were going to manage it, whether I was going to stay home or she was going to stay home. So I apologize for the last minute but this is being recorded, so we'll be fine. I expect to be in person on Wednesday. So expect to see all your smiling faces, or at least some of your smiling faces. But homework 2 for right now is probably on track. So you may get it on Wednesday. You may not, of course, but you may get it on Wednesday. I'd like to probably wait till the following Monday, but we shall see. Anyway, any questions, problems, complaints? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Hopefully you're already done with your homeworks. If not, I don't recommend waiting till last minute. There are a couple of things that are, require you to learn during the homework. And so you'll be a little bit surprised as to, how do I describe this? You'll be a little surprised that it takes a little bit longer than you might expect. So go ahead and get started on it. And let me know if you have any questions or problems or complaints. All right, y'all have a great day. Happy Rosh Hashanah, those who celebrate. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right, y'all have a great day. Hate online. Sometimes I hate being online because I like to say goodbye and hey, how you doing? That sort of stuff. And it's just very hard to do that. All right, y'all have a great day.